Trigger warning. This episode includes discussions of trauma, alcohol and substance abuse, addiction, and suicide. Listener discretion is advised.
There's this perception that as long as you talk about traumas that happened to you with someone who is trustworthy, that will be enough to heal you.
One of the things I say is I have to be able to respect my therapist. If I don't like the person or don't respect the person, I don't take in the information.
We don't want to force, especially we look at parts of ourselves that are trying to protect us from connecting with a certain memory. We don't want to just bulldoze over those parts and say,
welcome back to the show, everybody. Today we have Brad Galvin, who is a Seattle-based IFS-informed EMDR-certified addiction and trauma therapy specialist. Welcome, Brad.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're so excited for you to be here. And, a lot of audience and people who are listening might not be as familiar with what is IFS informed as well as what is EMDR certified. Will you please give us a little background on who you are as well as what you do?
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's great to be on the show. It's been great being able to connect with you a little bit as we've led up to being able to do this show together. So that's been fun. So I'm EMDR certified. So first of all, EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which means that you're using eye movements or another form of what's called bilateral stimulation. So doing something to both sides of the body in order to help desensitize traumatic memories. And so desensitize meaning just take the negative charge out of them. And then the R of EMDR, the reprocessing, is where you're actually pairing a positive belief with a formerly really upsetting memory. So it may be something going from like, I'm not okay, when you're feeling really upset about the memory when you normally think about it, to I'm okay, or I'm good enough, or I made it through. And so it's really interesting how that works within our bodies and minds to be able to heal in that way. And certified just is a level up from trained, which means I have some additional experience, additional hours of being supervised, and now act as a consultant myself, not as an EMDR consultant, because that has a specific meaning, but as a consultant supervisor. So supporting other people and training people in EMDR related skills. Also, and so IFS informed, so IFS stands for internal family systems. And that's the idea. If you think of it very simply, maybe it might be, I have a part of me that really loves my friend, and I have a part of me that really hates my friend. And then, and it's just this idea that we have different parts of ourselves, and that different parts of ourselves have different perspectives. But then we also have what's called our self energy, like our healthy adult self, so that we are able to see a broader perspective and see what's happening within us and recognize, oh, I have a part of me that was really upset, but actually I can see the bigger picture if I tune in with my self energy, which maybe some people in certain traditions might call that your highest self or your soul. And so really with EMDR is a full philosophy and also a technique of therapy. And internal family systems, I see a little bit more as how we are made up psychologically and our psyches and kind of how that fits together. And so they really support each other. And I weave in internal family systems work into my EMDR work I do with people.
I'm just so fascinating how many different modalities there are in the therapy world. Personally, I've done trauma therapy, I've done somatic work, have done hypnotherapy. 2 days ago, I interviewed somebody who do ketamine to help people go back to the painful memory. So when you were talking about desensitizing certain trauma, and I don't know the details about, what you do versus what she does, but I can see maybe the benefit have some sort of similarity. And when we were talking about there are parts of ourselves, and this particular guest also do parts therapy where she was like, when you were being traumatized, a part of you stuck in that moment And
Mm.
then the rest of you move on because that part was so overwhelmed, it just stayed. But then when we are triggered in the real world, in a situation that's similar to what we went through as a younger self, then that part kind of kicking to drive the bus, to drive the system.
Right. Right.
So I just want to say, wow, this is incredible. And I think the value of having different methods to help people is that not everything works will work for one person, might not work for the other person, right?
Hmm.
And one of the things I say is I have to be able to respect my therapist. If I don't like the person or don't respect the person, I don't take in the
Mm.
information. Like I don't value the training. So I
Yes.
just want to say just props to you guys, just the dedication in learning and be able to get certified and be able to bring this to the general public.
Well, thank you. Well, and I think Zen, it really brings up an important point. And while I am very much focused in my work with results, I also recognize the point that you make, which is you have to build a relationship, and the relationship takes time and the trust takes time. And so, therefore, I do a lot of work initially on what's called resourcing, which is part of it's phase two of EMDR's 8 phase model. And a lot of that is about connecting with people, connecting with positive resources within them. So different there's something called attachment focused EMDR. Laurel Parnell had created that approach, and basically looking at nurturing, protector, and wise figures. So if you go within yourself, who in your life is a wise figure that you can lean on? Who is a protector? Who is a nurturing figure? What's a peaceful place that you can connect with? So a lot of it is, especially throughout my work with people, it's connecting, it's building trust. It's yes, we're moving towards something. And also, we have a precious relationship that we're building. And I may not be the person for everybody. My approach may not be the approach for everybody. And so that's important to recognize as well. And so it's kind of that balance between I'm always looking to help people move forward. And so we're making progress and not maybe just chatting. On the other hand, we don't want to force, especially we look at parts of ourselves that are trying to protect us from connecting with a certain memory. We don't want to just bulldoze over those parts and say, your first session, we're going to work on that terrible thing that happened to you when you were 5. It's like, whoa, no, we need to ease into this, and it may take weeks or months before a person's system is ready to work with something that it's spent a lot of years pushing aside and avoiding. And so that's where the internal family systems for me links in with the EMDR is let's get permission from all of you that it's okay to work on this memory. And so for me, that's kind of how the two fit together. And that's part of the relationship building as well. And often while people are motivated, they have parts of themselves that are like, heck no, I spent 30 years avoiding this. And we want to acknowledge, yeah, and that part of you that is scared is welcome here.
I love that. I think it took me probably like 3 years to trust my therapist. And
Wow.
I
Yeah.
don't even think that I had a trust issue. I think just physically, I guess like, I don't want to say everything in my life prior to me starting therapy was a pretentious act, but I was conditioned to have to perform, even like subconsciously. I totally understand why would it take a while for different parts of you to trust your therapist. And
Hmm.
I think a lot of time relationships are built via conversations and we spend a lot of time talking to the people and earn that trust.
Hmm.
Um, but it seems to me in the recent years, people start to kind of understand that talking therapy might not be uh, the best way for certain individuals. And there are elements missing that are able to help them to integrate what they have learned. And nowadays, yesterday I was at this event and this is no judgment. I don't judge people, obviously, but there are people who are there where they just start talking and they are in therapy,
Mm.
but what they learned might not be reflected just yet
Mm.
in real
Mm.
life. So,
Mm.
what are some of the things that traditional talk therapy might be missing, and
Hmm.
people might need it to able to move on?
Yeah, well, I think you really bring up an important point. And so I think there's this perception that as long as you talk about traumas that happened to you with someone who is trustworthy, that will be enough to heal you. And while I do think that can be an important step, I always encourage people to limit how much they share until we're able to do something with it. So, in other words, when we're taking a trauma history as part of identifying EMDR, we call them targets, things we want to work on and heal and desensitize. As folks are coming up with those things, I'm saying you're welcome to share in detail. I don't encourage it because it's kind of like, to use a little bit of a crass example, it's sort of like if you have a scab and then you pick the scab and now you're bleeding. And while there may be some relief, some release, we're getting something out, it often is just bringing something up. And it's bringing something up in the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part of your brain, when where the trauma is stuck is in different parts of your brain. So it's not when we have an unprocessed traumatic memory, it's stored in packets, right? So we might have a certain scent that we smell that reminds us of a traumatic memory, and that can trigger us into feeling we're back there again. It might be a certain image, but it's not a coherent narrative. It's not, our brain hasn't fully processed it like we do primarily during REM sleep at night. And so if we're thinking we can just go into talk therapy, talk about this, we haven't integrated it. We haven't really, we're just using a part of our brain but not our whole brain. And so that's where I think talk therapy, and people can maybe even temporarily feel some relief, but longer term, this used to happen for me where it's like people would even say they felt better after the session, but the next week they come in and it's the same thing and we're in the same loop. And so I see you're smiling. I'm curious if that resonates for you at all.
I remember when I first started therapy, this was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I actually walked away from each of the sessions more angry than before. And I remember my therapist at the time was like, if you were to feel that way, you have to tell me about it. And the people pleasing part of me that used to exist didn't, because
Mm.
I wasn't sure how to, like, what that meant, right? And I didn't really trust her enough just yet to be able to, I resent you for bringing up certain things. So on one hand, I can understand why it's like picking up, like picking on is a scalp. How do you put
Picking a scab, kind of. Yeah.
that? And it made me feel more lonely and helpless
Mm.
because my foundation was not built, or I didn't have the resources I have to properly process that outside of that weekly 1 hour.
Yeah.
So talking about it made me go back to where I was without a proper support foundation in my day to day life. And I remember she kept saying, she was like, eventually your trauma is just going to be this big, like very small. And then you need to go out there and do more things to build your life up. But I just also don't think I had the capacity at a moment to even build a life. So
Hmm.
I can understand why talk therapy could backfire at times.
Hmm.
However, my challenge to you here is that I also believe that over the years of growing up, I never had a voice.
Mm.
Whenever I tried to have an opinion or share my story, the grown-ups always shut me down, or the
Uh,
people around me was not able to provide any sort of validation. So by her opening up the stage for me, I'm able to let it out. So the anger that's trapped in my body eventually did find a way to process
yes.
it, right? So like, what is a good balance here?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a really important point. And I think it's important not to oversimplify. And I think you're getting at something really important. For me to make a blanket statement, talk therapy is this, or EMDR is that, and putting one above the other. It's more about matching the approach to what the person needs. And so it sounds like there are elements of what you got that were really helpful. And that's great. And being listened to and being supported, it's something that's easy, I think, for us as therapists to underestimate the value of that. I think the risk is if we overestimate the value of that and we think all that people need is somewhere to come and talk, because there are certain, that's why there are different therapies. Like for OCD, for example, exposure response prevention is one of the top forms of approach to deal with that. And that's a form of cognitive behavioral therapy. Now, CBT may not work as well for processing trauma, where EMDR and some of the other more somatic approaches might work a little bit better. There are CBT related approaches that can be helpful. So it really is important that the therapy match the person, and recognizing that for us as therapists to recognize the potential limitations of what we approach and knowing when to refer someone out. Because, for example, often you might, if someone came to you with some kind of issue, you could just be approaching it from a surface level when it's, for example, not really about the person's boss. It's about the authority figure that's making them feel, as you referred to, really small. And so we need to work with that pain of that 5-year-old, which is how old a person feels when their boss is hovering over them. It feels like an abusive parent. So we need to not just address the issue, the current issue with the boss, but say, what is it about from your past that this is triggering? How can we heal that? And that's where I think traditional talk therapy might be missing. And then you might feel that you failed. Oh my gosh, like the therapist has said, eventually the trauma will get small and I just need to get out there. Well, it's not getting small. What's wrong with me? And therapists, we can have protector parts where we might blame our client. Hey, you're not getting better. That's your fault. It's not that I have limitations or my approach has limitations, right? So we as therapists can have our own blind spots. And so that's where it's really important to to really do a lot of self reflection and try to have as much humility as you can about the limitations of your approach and where another therapist and or another approach might be a better fit for that client. So yeah, I think you're onto some important pieces here.
Hopefully, that's the goal. So my previous therapist did connect me with somebody who do somatic work to help release some of the trauma that trapped in my body.
Mm-hmm.
I have not read this book. The Body Keeps the Score is very famous.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because when I tried to read it, I couldn't even make through the first chapter. The example that the author give in a book triggered me more, so I had to put it down. But just from a EMDR perspective,
Mm-hmm.
when somebody who has been traumatized, what is happening in the nervous system? And for the people who carry those unprocessed experiences, how can they be set free? In particular, with the EMDR method that you practice.
Well, often people can get stuck in kind of a fight, flight, or freeze state, which means there's overactivation of their sympathetic nervous system. And there's also what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, which kind of, it's like the relax and digest, you're safe nervous system that gets activated. But when we're under stress, it's the sympathetic nervous system. And so that's the fight, flight, or freeze. And so that's where we can get stuck with an overactive amygdala. So that's the part of the brain that is related to fear. We can have an underactive prefrontal cortex where we're not thinking as much. It's sort of offline. And then there can be some disorganization in our hippocampus, which is the memory, primarily works with memory. Our brains are very complex, but this is just kind of simplifying things. And so what happens is with EMDR, it helps to calm the amygdala. It helps to bring the prefrontal cortex more online. So we're able to think more logically and feel more logically, right? So it's like, I know on some level, let's say before treatment, someone might say, I know on some level that this happened 10 years ago, but it feels like it's happening every morning I wake up and it feels like it just happened yesterday. My friend just died yesterday or whatever the thing is. It's like Groundhog's Day. Trauma can be a little bit like that. And because it's also stored in a kind of a disorganized way, not necessarily as a coherent narrative. A smell might trigger it, a taste might trigger it, a sight might trigger it. And so, what EMDR helps to do through the use of bilateral stimulation and what they refer to as the adaptive information processing system that we just have as like inherent to ourselves, it's able to like create a coherent narrative. And then, sort of, if you imagine a memory like a Word document, it's like you take it out, you edit it, and then you resave it. And now it's saved as something like, instead of, oh my gosh, like every time I get into a car, I'm reminded of that car accident, to, oh, I'm getting into the car now. That accident happened 15 years ago. I survived and I'm okay. Instead of, I'm not going to get near a car because every time I am, I touch the metal of the car and I'm back there, because it's this disjointed sort of memory. And so the exact mechanism of how that works, there are a lot of different theories on how that happens exactly, but that is typically what happens. And it's amazing in a session where someone could go from, I'm disturbed at an 8 out of 10, 10 being the most distressed I could feel when I think about that car accident. And we do a number of sets of eye movements where the person has called the memory to mind. They're feeling it. They're half in this moment now and half in the past, in the trauma. And then over a number of sets of eye movements, maybe one or more sessions, they're like, now I'm like, oh, it happened in the past. It's not that big of a deal. And then it's like, oh, and that would tell me, well, okay, let's shift from the desensitization part, the D of EMDR, to the R of EMDR, where it's like, okay, well, now how do you feel about yourself? I'm okay, or I survived, or I'm safe. Great. So now hold that car accident along with that positive belief, I'm okay. And we do some sets with that. That gets to feel where it's 100% true for the person when they think of that memory. And now, sort of miraculously, they can think about the car accident and that is connected with I'm okay, and it doesn't bring up any body sensations, it doesn't bring up any upsetting emotions, and it's really incredible.
I have so many questions.
Yeah, okay. Good. I'll see what I can do.
The first word that stood out to me, you said it was somatic or sympathetic. What's the system that get activated when people are in the froze? Oh my God. What's the three stages people happen?
Yeah, fight, flight, or freeze
Right.
are
Fight,
the
flight, and
main
freeze.
ones. Yeah.
And you said activated a system called
So that's so there's sympathetic, which is
sympathetic.
that fight, flight, or freeze. And then
Okay.
a counterbalancing system is called parasympathetic, which
Got
is
it.
more like relaxation, digestion, kind of helps us to be calm.
Right. So sympathetic, actually, that's the word that stood out to me. Is this actually related when people say I am a sympathetic person?
I don't feel like I'm an expert enough on that word choice to answer that, but I don't believe that
You
there's
don't
an
think
association. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. There
Because
may
from
be.
my interpretation is when someone's sympathetic is to a certain degree this person can relate to another person. And this is me speculating, for somebody who is able to go through trauma and come out, you can't just don't think about it. It's in your cell, right? Like you experience it. So I
Mhm.
wondered if a person's personal experiences make them more likely to relate to other people's experiences, and hence they share the word. But who knows?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I mean, certainly from the standpoint of overactivation of that system can make people hypersensitive. So we say, the opposite of the desensitization of EMDR is the sensitization that happens. Let's say someone was in war and they, got used to hearing, gunfire. And then now, whenever they hear a car backfire, they might dive and try to get out of the way because they're sensitized to that sound. Whereas someone else might look around and go, whoa, was that a gunshot or a car backfire? They might be a little spooked, but they're going to be more curious. And
Right.
so I can see, yeah, I mean, in terms of a way to remember it, maybe that could be a good way to remember that. Like sympathetic, you're sensitive, you're feeling things. And certainly, yeah, I mean, you're you're definitely feeling things. And even someone who freezes, kind of like if you're freezing and you imagine, I think I was reading that brown bears you want to freeze and black bears you want to get out of the way or something. I don't know. It depends on the type of bear. I remember that. And it's like, okay, well, if you're freezing, it's a survival thing. Running is a survival thing. Fighting is a survival thing, right? So your body is definitely aware of its, like, hyper aware of its surroundings. And it's just, what is the best way for me to respond to this? Sometimes how that can show up for people is a tendency not only to be hyper vigilant, so they're responding very quickly, but sometimes also to be very passive. Because if you there's something called learned helplessness, where it's like, okay, well, I'm just not going to fight this because there's no point. And fighting, I could end up being hurt more. And that is sometimes the best response a person can have in a moment. One of the things that we're trying to heal is to remind a person's system, let's say they're an adult now and they went through a lot of trauma as a child. We want to work to remind their system, actually, you're big now, you're strong now, there's no authority figure over you, you're powerful. And that's a lot of the positive beliefs that all help people move towards shifting from I'm powerless, which maybe a person objectively was in the past in a certain memory, to I'm powerful. Wait, feel the strength of your adult body. Notice what's happening in your day to day adult life. Notice that you make your own choices. If you need to set boundaries, you can, and, all those kind of things. And so a lot of this work, both the IFS and EMDR, is helping to orient all of someone's parts, the younger parts that we talked about, to the reality of a person's life today, which is often they're not under threat. And if they are under threat, there are things they can do to, make themselves safe. And so that's the nice thing, is it's not about trying to convince someone of a story that isn't true. It's trying to help someone's whole system understand that the true story is that they're okay right now, that they're not under threat. And so it's kind of like someone looking at the sky and seeing the sky's red when it's blue. I'm able to work with them and, okay, little by little, we're going to help you to see that the sky is actually blue. But I'm not trying to convince you that a blue sky is red. That would be much harder. And of course, would be unethical. But, so that's a nice thing about this work, is really we're just slowly orienting people more and more towards the truth of their lives, which is that they're okay.
That's amazing. From your website, you mentioned that you specialize in gambling addiction.
Hmm.
So I want to take a step back and just kind of become a student here. I personally don't gamble. I don't know what happens in a person, like physiologically, like what happens and what are they, what are some of the things they're looking for through this activity, as well as, what are some of the things that might be missing in their own life. So they turn into a another they're trying to get it back through another channel.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, with gambling addiction, and yes, I am a certified gambling counselor. I supervise gambling counselors. I'm one of the volunteer positions I hold is I'm a chair of the Washington Gambling Certification Committee. So when people are seeking to become gambling counselors in the state, myself and my colleagues will look over their application, and we're doing outreach and things to support growth of the gambling addiction field. And so it's work that I'm very passionate about. And a couple things. One is, and I just want to kind of share this as a public service announcement, is that, gambling addiction has the highest suicide rate of any addictive disorder. And it makes sense when people think about it. It's often a secret that people hold. There's a lot of shame. You can't come back sometimes from losing a ton of money, or at least it's a long process. And then in terms of how it works in the brain, it's often overlooked, but it's lighting up the same brain areas as, methamphetamine, as cocaine, and the tolerance and withdrawal are often very similar. And so people build up tolerance. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. It's like, instead of, needing more of a drug to get the same effect, you need more gambling to get the same effect. So gambling, 50 cents a spin on a penny slot machine just doesn't do it for you anymore. You got to do, 500 credits, which is $5 a spin. Now you're spinning every 3 seconds. or even more often than that. And so it's easy to lose a lot of money. So, and the, some of the brain changes that start to happen too, where, you're just not getting the same pleasure from day to day activities. And so, in that way, it's like going cold turkey off of drugs or alcohol, which we tend to understand. But when it's gambling, we say, oh, what's wrong with you why can't you just stop? And so part of what makes recovery difficult is this kind of cultural belief that a lot of people have that it's not really addictive. And so it's how can you get addicted to a behavior? And the answer is you absolutely can. And often people do show withdrawal symptoms. And so, in terms of what to answer this piece of your question, there are many reasons why people gamble. And, like most addictions, there can be a genetic component, an environmental component. I tend to focus mostly on the environmental component. Often that can be a way that people might treat trauma or emotional discomfort because they can, really get into the zone sitting in front of a slot machine. You can really check out in the same way that someone on, coke or meth or heroin maybe is just totally disconnected from the stress of their life. And so, our work is kind of twofold. One is setting boundaries from what we call like barriers to money triggers. So, how do we protect your money from the gambling? And then also going underneath as part of my work, there are some EMDR related techniques, feeling state addiction protocol. There's something called the detour protocol. CraveX is another one, but they're EMDR related techniques that are specific to address addictions, including gambling disorder, where you can get underneath and both address the cravings, but also maybe addressing, like in the feeling state addiction protocol, what feeling do you get from gambling? An example would be, let's say someone, the first time they felt accepted by their father was when on their 21st birthday, their father invited someone to go play poker with dad and his friends. And so then this person kept gambling, not because of the gambling, but they liked that feeling of belonging. And so in this work from that approach, we would be helping to desensitize the feeling of belonging that the person got related to the gambling. So there's less of a draw. And then we'd also go back even further and say, what was it about your upbringing that made it so that you were drawn to this feeling of belonging so much? Oh, my dad didn't pay any attention to me, or my mom was abusive, or my uncle was this, or whatever it was. Okay, now that becomes an EMDR target. So there are ways that we're both doing some practical things, some psychoeducation around gambling addiction. And then we're also going deeper to say, yeah, exactly that question. What was going on for you that maybe, you know, compelled you to do this behavior even after you're having negative consequences? So not everyone that I work with has some underlying trauma that drove it. Sometimes it can just be it started out fun and then it got out of control and now I'm just craving it and my body's adjusted to it. And there's often something underneath that was pushing someone, even if they're not necessarily aware of what that is when we start treatment.
Wow. You know, I mean, when you were talking about the father figure or the belonging example, it kind of reminded me. I used to smoke cigarettes
Hmm.
and I didn't really understand why. And to be honest, when I quit, like I didn't really go through like a major withdrawal. Like I don't think I was addicted to it because I wasn't doing a lot. But I do remember growing up, like I was always separated from my parents. And when my dad, he lives in China and he thought he knew that I started smoking cigarettes, it become like a bonding thing. Like he would hand me cigarettes, which is highly not appropriate, but that made me felt closer to him.
Hmm.
So I think, into certain degree, I can understand why, even when it's not substance, maybe as a behavior, can also provide the same type of relief or
Hmm.
same type of feeling towards a missing piece in the puzzle.
Right. And of course, we want more of that. And so we can work with any parts of ourselves that feel shame to say, hey, this makes sense. You want to feel close to your dad. You want to feel, or you want to feel relief from this pain. I mean, one thing that I hear sometimes is people saying, well, I became addicted to alcohol because I used to have these terrible dreams about trauma that I had. And when I would drink before bed, I wouldn't dream. and I could fall asleep. And then so we think, oh, we'll just take away the alcohol and you'll be fine. And it's like, well, let's talk more about that. Let's talk about how this might affect someone. Let's understand that, you know, quitting whatever you're doing right out of the gate may or may not be the right thing for someone. Certainly, we want to make sure people are safe and aren't going to harm themselves or others. And also, you could be harming someone by saying, this is wrong, you shouldn't do it. And now we're just going to like take away this thing that was helping you survive. Let's be curious and see what role was gambling playing? What role does alcohol and drug use play? What role does this, kind of protector play that's pushing people away instead of no, you shouldn't push people away. It's like, well, wait a minute, let's see if we can be curious and be gentle with your system that's developed these kind of intricate relations within yourself.
Right.
I think that's important.
My when you were talking about the father situation, I thought about my situation. I
Hmm.
don't know if you're spiritual, but my AC just went on its own, which is crazy.
Really?
No one touched it. That's so
Really?
crazy. Yeah, and they never have happened before.
Really?
Also, my
I do
dad's not
believe in that. I know that there's so much that just because we can't see it
right.
doesn't mean that it's not happening.
But my dad's not even dead. He's like alive, so he couldn't turn it on. Like I don't know what happened. Anyway, and then this is not me obviously promoting any sort of alcohol use or any drug use. Me personally, I do drink socially. I don't do any drugs. But what I have heard one person say, and this is, I believe, is from a therapist, was people who do drugs know that it's bad for them and they're slowly killing themselves. But the reason why they don't walk away instantly is because if they don't do drugs today to take away the pain just a little bit, they might kill themselves today.
Mm,
So, and I think that helped me to have more compassion and empathy
mm,
towards people who are struggling with substance because, it's almost like they are making a choice on suffering.
mm,
And, a lot of time people do tend to choose the one that might relieve their pain momentarily, even knowing in the long run has bigger cost.
mhm,
And another thing about addiction, and this is, my own interpretation, and I don't know if this is the truth. I would love to have your opinion on it if you want to, is that when people first start, they don't think they're going to get addicted. And
mm,
tomorrow is going to be the day that life is going to look better. As a matter of fact, I used to have this belief that if I just go through the therapy, my entire life after therapy sessions will be rainbows and sunshine. There's no more hardship, and everything's going to be so great. Angels will be singing. And I think that belief kind of like kept me in my trauma a little bit longer
mm,
than I
mm,
thought
mhm,
because it's almost like us versus them.
mm,
Right? I'm at fault. I fucked up. Like my parents fucked up. And I can't move on because the outer world is too good for me. Like I'm not ready. And I think, yeah, like I think I, in a way, caused my own suffering.
mm,
And, but then I always think, tomorrow I'll eat healthier. Tomorrow I would be more productive. Like, there's always tomorrow. So I would say, and I don't know once again if it's the truth, but people start small and one day they wake up and they're like, I don't even recognize where I am at it.
mhm, mhm.
Would
Yeah,
you
I
say
mean,
now something also happened?
yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's also how addiction can build and can grow is definitely that way. And I think that's, when you look at tolerance or using in greater amounts to get the same effect, you know, I mean, those are things that are part of the diagnosis of different addictions. And I think sometimes people, the first time they gamble, will know I'm hooked, I'm in, just like some first time maybe someone does heroin, they're like, okay, and they're already off to the races. But often it will sneak up on people and say, oh, well, I start out and I use this socially. And then it's like, then it starts to creep in. I don't really feel that well. Oh, I'm going to try it now. Oh, I feel better, And so if we look at addictions as parts of ourselves, and parts generally, certainly protector parts, which addictions could be seen as, have a limited perspective, but they're trying to be helpful. So trying to be helpful means the alcohol consuming part can see that alcohol could be helpful and you don't feel good and you drink and you feel better. But the limited perspective is that alcohol consuming part can't see the consequences of drinking. And so when we say like blended with that part, we're feeling that part's energy. We don't have our broader perspective, our healthy adult self perspective of, yes, I can drink, but then maybe will be getting into the habit of that. And then instead of going for a walk or meditating or calling a friend, when I feel stressed, I go right to alcohol. And a year from now, maybe I'm only going to alcohol. That's your self energy. That alcohol part's just like, I will help you, and right now you're going to feel better. And we don't care about tomorrow. We don't care if we're hungover. And so understanding, not saying, oh, this alcohol part's bad, but understanding, well, let's see if I can be curious about it. Oh, how are you trying to help me? Hey, are you aware that I'm here? Because often these parts of ourselves aren't aware that we're here. They're not aware that there are other options that are going to be sustainable that aren't going to hurt us. And so we can just kind of develop, these parts can take on a bigger and bigger and bigger role in our lives until it just becomes automatic. And then we're preoccupied with alcohol or gambling or whatever the addiction is. And it takes on a life of its own. And like you said, at one point we just wake up and we're like, whoa, I just woke up and had vodka for breakfast. Like, when did that happen? You know?
Right.
Or I woke up and I'm on my app and I've already, placed bets on 4 games. It's like, Guatemalan ping pong. It's like, when did that happen? I used to just bet on the Super Bowl, right?
Right.
Now I'm just betting on anything that's happening right now in the world that's a sport, right?
Yeah.
So
For the people who might not be able to, don't have the resources, might work with you or other therapists, what would be something small that they can do today to even just become more aware to help them, change the trajectory of where they're headed?
for me, I find you mentioned meditation. We were talking a little bit about before we got on air here. And I think the degree to which we can try to sit with what's happening with us, and it just sometimes this is helpful for me where I'll sit down. Usually in meditation, it's like, oh, for me and kind of how I do it, it's like a thought comes up, I try to come back to my body. I've also done times where I allow myself to sit with the intention of meditating, but also with the intention of, as a thought comes up that might be useful for me, journaling. And so I guess if, we all have ourselves, we all have time, we all have ways that we could journal, to just see if I can just sit with, what am I noticing? Oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable, or oh, I'm having this awareness. But instead of me trying to kind of force something, it's more like me being open to see what comes, and then see if I'm sort of taking a little bit of an inventory of, where am I in these different places in my life and what am I feeling? And then certainly meditation itself as a practice, aside from this kind of specific way of using it for journaling, I think could be a good place to start. And often we have insight and wisdom already. It's, well, what has worked for me in the past can be a simple question, because often we have this wisdom within us. Yeah, I don't know why, but for some reason, going for a walk each morning for 10 minutes, like that was the happiest I ever was in my life. Cool. So often we have these answers within us. And I would say a big part of what EMDR is really about is tapping into our own wisdom. I don't know where we're going to go when we're doing the eye movements, but people's system knows, oh, why? That's weird. I haven't thought of that memory in 25 years. Go with that. And then eventually these dots are being connected. And what was this disparate memory with all these different pieces in our brains starts to coalesce into something. And apparently our system needed to connect with what happened 25 years ago that seems totally unrelated. And now we're thinking of Aunt so-and-so who we haven't talked to in 10 years. And now we're just feeling sad or angry. And now we notice our leg hurts. And now we notice it's just, and then by the end, it's sort of like, this path that might make sense or might seem to make no sense. Then we check back in with that memory. What's happening now? Well, yeah, I don't know. It's only like a 2 out of 10. Oh, because a half an hour ago it was a 9 out of 10, and you were crying even thinking about it. That's cool. So it's kind of like that recognition that we have this wisdom. And I think that's part of that meditative piece and just seeing what arises. Yeah, this is my truth. Right. And so I think that could be a place to start.
I love it. Well, thank you, Brad, for joining us today. I'll make sure when we publish this episode, your contact info and your websites are linked to the episode bio. But thank you for joining us. I've learned so much from you, and I'm sure listeners have as well.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor, and I love your questions, and it was fun to get to know you a little bit.
For mental health and suicide support, call or text 988. For substance use support, call 1-800-662-4357. To chat by text, text HOME, HOME, to 741-741. Thank you so much for being here with me today on the Zhen podcast. If this episode resonated with you, make sure you're subscribed and leave a comment with your biggest takeaway. That's how we grow this community and get these conversations in front of more people who need them. And if somebody came to mind while you're listening, please do make sure to send this episode to them. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify. All linked below. Until next time, stay sharp, stay intentional, and be good.